The reception hall was bathed in a warm golden light, laughter bounced off the walls, and the air hummed with joyful energy. In my hand, a glass of champagne fizzed with tiny bubbles. It was our wedding day, and for a moment, I let myself believe everything was perfect. Then my new husband Mark clinked his glass for attention. A wide, handsome smile spread across his face as he quieted the room. He pointed his champagne flute directly at me, his eyes twinkling with what I thought was affection. "And here's to my wife," he bellowed. "She has no job, just sits at home all day." The words hit me like a physical slap. The room seemed to tilt, and the joyful noise warped into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. His friends erupted in a wave of loud, booming laughter. It washed over me, cold and cruel, drowning me in pure humiliation. My knuckles went white around the stem of my glass. I prayed it wouldn't shatter. I could feel 100 pairs of eyes on me, pitying and laughing at me. My new husband's eyes were the worst. But through the fire of that shame, something else rose up, a feeling as cold and hard as steel. What he didn't know, and what none of them could ever imagine, was that the very next morning, he and his laughing friends had a mandatory 8 a.m. performance review with the anonymous new owner of their entire company, me. Before I tell you how I turned their laughter into dead silence, welcome to Granny's secret. If you believe underestimating someone can be a fatal mistake, take a moment to subscribe. Now, let me tell you about the company they thought I knew nothing about. It wasn't just a building with a name. It was my father's entire life, his legacy, built from the ground up with nothing but a brilliant mind and calloused hands. He called it Innovate Marketing, and it was where I grew up. I learned to read using his advertising copy, and did my math homework on the back of discarded spreadsheets. He was a kind, wonderful man, who saw potential in everyone, and believed that respect was the only currency that truly mattered. He always told me, "Sweetheart, I built this for you, but I want you to find your own way first. See the world?" And I did. But a year ago, the world came to a screeching halt. We lost him suddenly, to a heart attack that felt like it ripped the soul out of my own chest. A week later, I was sitting in a stuffy lawyer's office, my world still a blur of grief, when his last will and testament was read. He had left the entire company, all of it, to me. I was the sole owner. My heart nearly stopped. But there was a condition, a final lesson from the man who was always teaching. The lawyer cleared his throat and read the last stipulation aloud. For a period of 1 year, I was to be a ghost owner. I would have full authority, make every final decision, but my identity would remain a complete secret to everyone, except the CFO and the lawyer himself. I would operate through them, learning every nut and bolt of the business from the inside out, without the pressure or the title. He wanted me to understand the company not as an heiress, but as a leader. The 1-year anniversary of his death was the week after my wedding. The timing felt like fate. Mark and I had only been dating for a few months when Dad passed, so, to him, my father was just a nice man who ran some small local agency. He never connected the dots. He had no idea. So, for the past year, I lived a life split in two. The world saw one version of me, a quiet, unassuming woman who was taking a break from work. Mark certainly did. He'd come home from his job at Innovate Marketing, kick off his expensive shoes I knew were paid for by a bonus I had personally approved, and complain loudly about his day. "You wouldn't believe the incompetence of the people I work with," he'd say, slumping onto the sofa. "The new owner has no idea what they're doing. It's all just chaos." I would just nod, handing him a drink, my mind racing with the quarterly reports I still had to review. "That sounds tough," I'd say, my voice even and calm. His workday ended at 6. Mine was just beginning. He'd be fast asleep by 10, snoring softly in our bed, and I would creep into my small home office. He thought I used it for online shopping and browsing recipes. He had no idea it was the secret headquarters of his entire company. I'd power on my encrypted laptop, the screen illuminating my face in the darkness. And for the next 5 hours, I was no longer Mark's quiet girlfriend. I was the CEO. I was on secure conference calls with our teams in London and Tokyo, making decisions about million-dollar budgets and international campaigns. I was analyzing performance data, identifying weaknesses, and planning a corporate restructuring that was long overdue. I was shaping the future of hundreds of employees, and one of them was the man sleeping soundlessly in the next room, dreaming of his own promotion. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. He saw himself as the provider, the one with the important career. He loved to talk about his salary, how it paid for our nice apartment and our dinners out. He had no idea his whole department was a financial black hole. I remember the day the CFO sent me the preliminary plan for the next quarter. It was a file named Redundancy Plan, Marketing Debt. My heart dropped like a stone. I saw the list of names scheduled to be laid off, and there it was, Mark Kensworth. His entire team had been underperforming for 6 months. The numbers were brutal. Any other CEO would have signed off on it without a second thought. It was a smart business move, but I hesitated. I looked at his name on that list, and I thought about the way he lit up when he talked about a campaign he was proud of. So, I did something that went against the cold logic of business. I called an emergency board meeting. I argued for them. I made a case that the team had untapped potential and just needed better leadership and a clearer strategy. A strategy I would personally draft. I convinced the board to not only keep his department, but to invest another $250,000 into it. I saved his job. I saved his career. And he never, ever knew. He just came home a week later, crowing about how upper management finally came to their senses and saw how valuable his team was. But the silence was the hardest part. The emotional toll was a constant heavy weight. The worst was when he would try to explain my own business to me. We'd be out to dinner, and he'd lean forward conspiratorially, his voice low as if he were sharing a huge secret. "You know," he'd start, "the key to a successful campaign launch is all about synergy." He would then proceed to describe, with complete inaccuracy, the very marketing strategy I had personally written and approved the week before. I had to sit there, nodding and smiling, making little interesting sounds as he mansplained my own work to me. I had to pretend to be impressed by the very ideas that had come from my own mind. There were nights I literally had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming the truth across the table. I just kept telling myself, "It's for Dad. Honor his wishes. Just 1 year." That joke at our wedding wasn't a one-off mistake. It wasn't a slip of the tongue fueled by too much champagne. It was the final, public declaration of what he'd been showing me in private for months. It was the culmination of 1,000 tiny moments of disrespect, a long, slow burn of condescension that I had quietly endured. I remember a dinner party at his friend Dave's house a few months before the wedding. Dave, who would later be his best man, turned to me with a friendly smile. "So, what is it you do?" he asked. It was a simple question, but it always made my stomach tie itself in knots. Before I could even open my mouth to give my vague, pre-rehearsed answer about doing some freelance consulting, Mark jumped in with a hearty laugh. He put his arm around my shoulder, squeezing it a little too tight. "Oh, she's in between things right now," he announced to the table. "Taking some time to find herself." He said it like he was proud of being so generous, so supportive of his little unemployed girlfriend. The table nodded in understanding. I just smiled, a tight, painful smile, while my mind screamed, "Find myself, find myself?" I found myself at 2 a.m. last Tuesday, when I personally signed off on the multi-million-dollar acquisition of our biggest competitor. But I said nothing. I just let him paint me as a lost, jobless woman he was kindly taking care of. I let him make me small, because I thought I was protecting a bigger secret. Then came the wedding planning. That was a masterclass in his condescension. I had a clear vision for our day, something elegant and timeless. I found a beautiful historic venue with gorgeous gardens, a place I knew we could easily afford. In fact, I knew that the profits from a single successful campaign could have paid for the entire wedding tenfold. When I showed him the brochure, he looked at the price and let out a low whistle. He pulled me close, his tones soft and patronizing, like he was explaining something to a child. "We have to be realistic, babe," he said, stroking my hair. "It's beautiful, but we can't start our marriage in debt. I'm the only one with an income here, remember?" The sting of those words was sharper than any insult. I'm the only one with an income here. I was literally paying his salary. I was paying for the roof over his head, the car he drove, the very suit he was wearing. My secret life felt like a cage I had built for myself. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to lay my bank statements on the table and watch his jaw hit the floor. But I couldn't. The year wasn't over yet, so I just nodded and let him choose a cheaper, mediocre venue. I let him feel like the responsible one, the provider, all while I was silently funding his entire life. The final warning sign, the one I should have run from, came at the rehearsal dinner. The night was supposed to be a happy celebration. Our families and the wedding party were all there. Mark's best man, Dave, stood up to give a toast. He raised his glass, a drunken grin on his face. "I've known Mark for a long time," he started. "He's a shark in the office, a real hard worker. And a guy like that, he deserves a break when he gets home. He deserves to put his feet up. And I'm so glad he's finally found a woman who will have his dinner ready and his slippers waiting for him." The room chuckled. It was supposed to be a harmless, old-fashioned joke. But I looked at Mark, waiting for him to laugh it off, to defend me, to say something like, "She's my partner, not my maid." But he didn't. He beamed. He looked prouder at that moment than I had ever seen him. He raised his own glass to Dave, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. And in that instant, I finally saw it. I saw the truth with perfect, devastating clarity. He didn't see an equal. He didn't see a partner to build a life with. He saw an accessory, a trophy wife whose only value was in her ability to stay home, look pretty, and make his life more comfortable. He didn't want a wife, he wanted a service. And all of that, all those little cuts, all those moments of biting my tongue, all that swallowed pride, it all led to that moment at our wedding reception. Standing there in my beautiful white dress, listening to the roaring laughter of his friends as the man I had just promised my life to pointed at me and dismissed my entire existence with a single cruel joke. It was no longer about honoring my father's wishes. It was about realizing I had made the biggest mistake of my life. It all led to that moment at our wedding reception, standing there in my beautiful white dress, listening to the roaring laughter of his friends as the man I had just promised my life to pointed at me, and dismissed my entire existence with a single cruel joke. It was no longer about honoring my father's wishes. It was about realizing I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't throw a drink or scream at him. I just turned, my heart a leaden weight in my chest, and walked away. I left him standing there with his laughing friends. I walked out of the reception hall, the sound of cheery music fading behind me with every step. I moved through the hotel lobby like a ghost, my big white dress rustling against the polished floors, earning a few strange looks that I didn't even have the energy to notice. Our honeymoon suite was dark and silent. It felt a world away from the party still raging downstairs, though I could feel the faint, muffled thump of the bass drum through the floorboards. It felt like a heartbeat, mocking me. I closed the door, and the silence was deafening. Slowly, mechanically, I unzipped the back of the dress. The expensive satin and lace pooled at my feet in a sad white heap. I kicked it aside and pulled on the simple silk robe the hotel had provided. I went to the window and stared at the glittering city lights, but I didn't see them. I only saw my own reflection in the dark glass, a pale, hollowed-out version of myself. The laughter from the party echoed in my head, each burst a fresh wave of humiliation. But underneath the shame, something far worse was churning. I felt like a fraud, a complete and utter fraud. For a year, I had been living a lie, pretending to be someone I wasn't. But who was the real me? Was I the powerful, anonymous CEO who commanded a multi-million-dollar company from the shadows? Or was I the quiet, jobless wife who stood by silently while her new husband made her the punchline of a joke? At that moment, I felt like I was neither. I had betrayed my own strength to appease a man who clearly had no respect for me. And in doing so, I had betrayed my father's legacy. He had entrusted me with his life's work, and I had been so focused on keeping my promise of silence that I had forgotten his most important lessons. Tears I didn't know I was holding back began to stream down my face, hot and silent. I had never felt so lost or so completely alone. I couldn't stand looking at my own pathetic reflection a second longer. I turned away from the window, needing a distraction, anything to pull me out of the spiral. My eyes landed on my laptop, sitting on the desk. My lifeline. The one part of my life that still felt real and solid. I picked it up and retreated to the big, empty bed, the cool metal of the computer a small comfort in my hands. I opened it, and the screen flickered to life. The desktop background was a picture of me and my father, taken a few years ago. We were standing in front of the main entrance of the Innovate Marketing building. He had his arms slung around my shoulder, and he was looking at me with a smile so full of pride, it could have lit up the whole city. My heart ached just looking at it. And then, as if he were right there in the room with me, I heard his voice in my memory, as clear as day. It was from a conversation we'd had right after I graduated from business school. He'd walked me through the executive floor, his name in bold letters on the frosted glass of the corner office. I'd told him how intimidating it all was. He had just laughed, a warm, deep sound, and put his hands on my shoulders. His voice echoed in my mind. "Sweetheart, your name is on the building. Act like it. Never let anyone, no matter who they are, make you feel small in a house you built." The memory struck me like lightning. It cut straight through the fog of my grief and humiliation, a single, perfect point of clarity. My father's words. Never let anyone make you feel small in a house you built. Mark didn't just work at my company. He lived in my world. I paid his salary. I had saved his job. This was my house. The tears stopped. Just like that. The humiliation burned away, leaving behind the cold, hard steel of my father's legacy. He hadn't raised a doormat. He had raised a CEO. And my year of silence, my promise to him, was officially over at midnight. I had fulfilled my duty. I was free to act. My fingers, which had been trembling just moments before, were now steady. My sadness was gone, replaced by a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel for a full year, pure, undiluted authority. This was no longer about a ruined wedding or a broken heart. This was about a professional problem. An employee had shown a profound lack of judgment and had publicly disrespected the core values of my company. It was time to restore order. I didn't close my dad's photo. I left it on the screen, a silent reminder of who I was. I opened my secure email portal, the one Mark had no idea even existed. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the clicks sharp and precise in the silent room. Each keystroke felt like a nail being hammered into the coffin of his arrogance. 2 board members, executive team. Subject, mandatory emergency board meeting, 8 a.m. The invitation was sent. The meeting was set. And come Monday morning, my husband would finally meet his new boss. The invitation was sent. The meeting was set. And come Monday morning, my husband would finally meet his new boss. I didn't go back to the hotel suite that night. I couldn't stand the thought of being in the same room as him, of having to pretend for one more second. I checked into a different hotel across town, a sleek corporate place of glass and steel. I spent all of Sunday in that room, not grieving but preparing. I was a general planning a battle. I reviewed every file, every performance report, every single piece of data, until I knew it all by heart. There would be no room for error, no space for emotion, only facts. Mark had texted me a dozen times, his messages shifting from confused to angry. "Where are you? Then are you seriously still mad about a stupid joke? And finally, "Fine, be that way, see you at home." He called once, but I let it go to voicemail. He left a rambling, hungover message complaining about the ridiculously early meeting the new owner had called for Monday. It was the last time I would ever hear his voice as his wife. Monday morning, I didn't get ready like a bride. I got ready like a CEO. I bypassed the soft dresses in my luggage and pulled out the outfit I had packed for this exact moment. A charcoal grey power suit with razor-sharp shoulders. A simple black silk blouse. I pulled my hair back into a severe, tight bun. Not a single strand was out of place. The woman staring back at me from the mirror was not the quiet, agreeable girl from the wedding. This was someone else. This was the woman my father had raised. This was me. I arrived at the office an hour early. The building was quiet, holding its breath before the chaos of the week. I went straight to the main boardroom on the top floor, my father's old boardroom. I took my place at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, the seat that had been waiting for me for a year. From there, I had a perfect view of the large monitor displaying the security feed from the hallway. I watched as the other board members arrived, nodding to them as they entered. They knew who I was, and their expressions were a mixture of respect and intense curiosity. Then, at precisely 8:01 a.m., they arrived. Mark, his best man Dave, and the other two groomsmen, Paul and Kevin. They stumbled in, looking exactly as I expected, hungover, disheveled, and radiating an aura of entitled annoyance. Dave was complaining loudly about his headache. Paul was loosening his tie before he even sat down. Mark, my husband, was the most arrogant of them all. He slumped into a chair, grabbing a bottle of water and draining half of it in one go. "Can you believe this?" he grumbled to Dave, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Who does this new owner think he is, calling a meeting this early the Monday after my wedding?" Dave smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Don't worry about it. It's probably some old guy who inherited the company. Give us a week. We'll have him wrapped around our little finger. Just like the old board." They chuckled. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging nervous glances. I just watched the monitor, my expression unreadable, my heart beating a slow, steady, powerful rhythm. It was time. I stood up, smoothed down the front of my jacket, and gave a slight nod to my CFO, a kind, grey-haired man named Arthur, who had been my father's most trusted friend. He nodded, his eyes full of encouragement. The boardroom doors were heavy oak. I pushed them open. They swung inward with a soft, expensive whoosh. I walked in, my heels clicking with sharp authority on the marble floor. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. I didn't look at Mark. I didn't look at his friends. I kept my eyes fixed on the empty chair at the head of the table. I walked the length of the room with a calm, deliberate pace and took my seat. A thick, confused silence fell over the room. I could feel Mark's eyes on me, boring me. I could practically hear his brain trying to process what was happening. Arthur rose, his voice clear and formal. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. For the past year, as you know, the company has been under interim leadership. That period has now concluded. I'd like to formally introduce you to the person who has been guiding our strategy and who will now be taking her rightful place. Everyone, this is the owner and CEO of Innovate Marketing." He gestured to me. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete that the clatter of a ceramic coffee mug slipping from someone's fingers and shattering on the floor sounded like a gunshot. I finally lifted my eyes and panned them slowly across the faces of my husband and his friends. It was like watching a movie in slow motion. I saw their smug, arrogant smirks melt away, replaced by slack-jawed confusion. Then, as reality began to sink in, the confusion curdled into a mask of pure, undiluted horror. Dave's face went white as a sheet. Paul looked like he was going to be sick. Kevin just stared, his eyes wide and unblinking. But Mark, his reaction was the most satisfying of all. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and clammy. His mouth hung open in a perfect O of disbelief. His eyes, the same eyes that had twinkled with mockery as he humiliated me at our wedding, were now wide with terror. He looked from me to Arthur and back again, searching for any sign that this was an elaborate, insane joke. He found none. I let them stew in that silence for a full 10 seconds. Then, I leaned forward slightly, placed my hands on the table, and spoke. My voice was calm, cold, and devoid of any emotion. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my gaze sweeping over all of them, but never lingering on Mark. "Thank you for coming in on such short notice. Let's talk about performance." I picked up a small remote and clicked it. The large screen behind me flickered to life, displaying the first slide, Q3 Performance Review. Mark whispered something to Dave, a panicked, choked sound. "This is a joke, right? This has to be some kind of insane joke." I ignored him completely. "As you know," I continued, "we've been analyzing departmental efficiency for some time now. And the results have made it clear that a significant corporate restructuring is required. Effective immediately." I clicked the remote again. A new slide appeared. It was the marketing department's organizational chart. "Let's start with project management," I said, my eyes landing on Dave. "Mr. Davies." Dave flinched as if I'd struck him. "Your team," I said, as his performance metrics appeared on screen in bright, damning red, "is currently 28% below its annual target. 2 of your largest clients have filed formal complaints in the last quarter, citing missed deadlines and a general lack of professionalism. But more troubling than that," I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in, "are the irregularities in your expense reports." I clicked again. Scans of his falsified reports appeared. "You claimed over $10,000 in client dinners on weekends that security logs show you weren't even in the country. Your termination is effective immediately. Security will meet you at your desk." Dave's face crumpled. He opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. I didn't wait. "Mr. Thompson," I said, turning my attention to Paul, "your negligence on the Sterling account resulted in a loss of a $2 million contract, an error that could have been avoided by simply double-checking the final proposal, as is protocol. That is a fireable offense. You are also terminated. And Mr. Gable," I told Kevin, "it has come to our attention that you have been discussing confidential company projects at bars with employees from our direct competitors. Violating the non-disclosure agreement you signed. You are terminated. Security will escort all 3 of you from the building now." 3 large security guards, who had been waiting outside, entered the room. As they led the 3 stunned, speechless men away, I finally turned my attention to the last remaining member of their little group. I didn't look at him. I looked at the screen, where his department's performance chart was now displayed. It was a sea of red ink. "Mr. Kensworth," I said, using his last name. The word felt foreign and formal, a clean break from the man I had married. He finally found his voice. It was a weak, trembling whisper. "Honey. What is this? What are you doing?" I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "The marketing division, which you have been managing for the last year, has been the single most underperforming department in this entire company for 3 consecutive quarters. It has been a consistent financial drain, showing no signs of improvement despite significant additional investment." I finally looked at him, not as his wife, but as his boss, as the woman he had underestimated, mocked, and humiliated. There was no anger in my eyes, just the cold, hard finality of a business decision. "As a result," I said, my voice unwavering, "your entire department is being dissolved. Your position is now redundant. You will be given a standard severance package. The contents will be mailed to you." He just stared at me, his face a mess of confusion, betrayal, and terror. He tried to speak again, to plead, but I simply looked away from him, addressing the room at large. "This company was built on a foundation of respect," I said, my voice ringing with an authority he had never heard before. "Respect our clients and each other. That foundation will be restored. Effective immediately. You may collect your personal items. The security guard who had been waiting by the door stepped forward and placed a hand on my husband's shoulder. And just like that, the noise was gone. The room was quiet. It was time to get to work. And just like that, the noise was gone. The room was quiet. It was time to get to work, when the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind my ex-husband. A profound silence settled over the boardroom. It wasn't a feeling of triumphant victory, not really. There was no joy in dismantling the lives of 4 men, even if they had earned it. Instead, what I felt was a quiet, somber sense of order being restored. It was the feeling of a crooked picture frame finally being set straight. The foundation of respect my father had laid for his company had been cracked, and I had just finished sealing it, with the remaining board members looking at me with a newfound solid respect. I took a deep breath and said, "Now, let's talk about the future." That was 6 months ago, and in that time, everything has changed. The company my father built is breathing again. Walking the halls of Innovate Marketing is like night and day. The toxic culture of fear and gossip that had festered in Mark's department is gone, replaced by a vibrant hum of collaboration and genuine excitement. I made it my mission to rebuild, not just the company's profits, but its soul. I promoted talented people who had been overlooked for years, and I brought in fresh creative minds. Now, when I walk through the office, people meet my eye and smile. We talk about their projects, their ideas, their families. It's a true team, a partnership. And as for me, I feel like I'm finally breathing too. For the first time in over a year, I'm not 2 people. I'm just one. I'm not hiding any part of myself. I arrive at the office every morning, and it feels like coming home. I sit in my father's old chair, in his corner office overlooking the city, and I feel his presence not as a weight of expectation, but as a source of quiet strength. Around my neck, I wear the simple gold necklace he gave me for my college graduation. It's a constant, gentle reminder of where I came from and what I'm capable of. I lead meetings with a confidence that feels earned. I make tough decisions with a clarity I never knew I had. I am not just surviving, I am thriving. I am at peace. Of course, there were loose ends to tie. The divorce was finalized 2 months ago. My lawyer told me it was one of the quickest, cleanest proceedings she'd ever seen. Mark, through his own lawyer, had initially demanded half of everything. He had tried to argue that his support during our relationship entitled him to a piece of what he now knew was a corporate empire. But then my lawyer presented the prenuptial agreement, the very same one he had insisted on before the wedding. I remember him sitting across from me at a coffee shop, explaining it with such condescending certainty. "It's just a formality," he had said, "to protect my assets, since I'm the one with the career." He had been so sure of his own superiority, so convinced that I had nothing to protect. And in his arrogance, he had signed an ironclad document stating that all premarital and inherited assets would remain separate property forever. He had built the very legal fortress that now stood between him and my father's company. My lawyer said when that document was presented, his entire claim fell apart. He walked away with nothing but what he came in with. I heard through the grapevine that he and his friends struggled. Their reputations in the industry were tarnished. Being publicly fired for performance issues and misconduct tends to follow you. I don't take any pleasure in that. Their failure is their own. My focus has been on building, not breaking. When I look back on that horrible day at my wedding, I see it differently now. It wasn't just an ending. It was a violent, painful but necessary beginning. It was a wake-up call that shattered the illusion I had been living in. I finally realized it was never a story about revenge. It was a story about reclamation. I had to reclaim my name, my power, and my self-respect from a man who never saw my value in the first place. He thought my value was tied to having a job title he could understand. He never realized that my most important job was one he never saw, being the daughter of a man who taught me that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. The wedding is annulled, the company is thriving, and for the first time in a long, long time, I am not hiding any part of myself. This morning, a package arrived. It was a small, elegant brass nameplate for my desk. I unwrapped it and set it down on the polished wood. It didn't say Mrs. Kensworth. It bore my name. My real name. The name my father gave me. The name that's on the building. I picked up a pen to sign off on the new quarterly budget, a future I had built, and I finally felt whole. Thank you for being a part of this story. If you believe in the power of reclaiming your own narrative, I hope you'll join our family by subscribing. I'm Granny. And I'll see you next time.